What happened today was a complete disgrace in terms of all of this trophy holding regarding the Steve Bannon firing. I'm going to read off a couple headlines.
What happened today was a complete disgrace in terms
Just as soon as
of
I
all
can
of this.
remember to turn this volume off. Sorry about that. I'm all shook up today. It was a horrible mood, just watching it. And I'm going to bring up a piece that I saw earlier, and I'm going to write a response to it once I get a chance. Problem is that I don't seem to have great timing in terms of having, having time to actually write. That's why I don't write as much as I used to. But this is a issue that I think has to be hashed out. The issue of Bannon and the issue of all the other crap that they've been talking, for the past few weeks. All this garbage that they're trying to start, that Donald Trump is a Nazi. It's the same thing. Remember when last week they were trying to make this ridiculous case that he was actually, since the election they've been trying to make the case that he's an agent of Russia. Now they were trying to make the case that he's less sane than the leader of North Korea. Now I hope you guys remember that only 3 years ago, I think it was only 3 years ago, it might even be less, I think it was 2015 actually, the media and their studio brothers and sisters, they tried to make the case that they released this film, the interview about Kim Jong-un, and it was basically what you would call a character assassination of Kim Jong-un, which some would say there's no need to, because his whole life is stranger than fiction. And I think that it's ironic that they've shifted. This is the 1984 paradigm at work. You have to really recognize this. You have, and I'm going to show this other screen in a minute, but only after I contextualize it. The same thing that they did with Kim Jong-un. They made a whole movie. Why did they release a movie that was basically smear against Kim Jong-un, if it was not true, like that? Or if you remember, even before that, there was the movie Red Dawn, a remake of Red Dawn, which was a 1980s anti-communist movie. Well, they remade it under President Obama, and North Korea was in place of the Russians and the Cubans. Well, why did they do that? Why did they make those movies 3-4 years ago and release them to the public? I mean, let's even look at some of the artwork there, to get an idea. I mean, this is not even-handed artwork. Let's look at the interview. We have here. I'm going to present the screen. There's share this so you guys can see. Whoops, I don't want to share quite that much. Hold on. I want to share one screen. So there you go. So you have the interview. It was an anti-communist movie, basically. I mean, they didn't really talk about communism. They made it more about Kim Jong-un. But you have this character in the middle. You see my cursor? This was played by it was very well made. I'm not saying you shouldn't make movies like that, but if they're going to start saying that now, for what, and I like it that this is the German poster, because it truly, if you're gonna make propaganda, why not make it in German, the best language of propaganda? Not Japanese, not Russian, German. Best language for propaganda. They do it better than anybody else. Got to hand it to them. Look at all the propaganda that they're doing now to justify censorship in Germany in the name of multiculturalism. I mean, it's sick. We live in a sick society. I don't know if you guys think the same way as I do. I mean, put in the chat what your thoughts are, and let's look at the Red Dawn. And I'm not saying I don't like the movies. I'm just saying if these issues are not as bad as people think they are, okay? Let me see, 2012. But even more recently. I mean, look at that. You can tell my computer is not the swiftest right now. But you have this, Jesus, almost like 1995 again, isn't it, guys? See if we can get some other photos here. I mean, they're not even showing photos of the Koreans here, which I think is very strange. But, you know, let's show the villain. See, this was the villain in 2012, okay? This was the villain. Don't forget there was also, and this is an amazing movie, Team America World Police. So this whole bullshit now that Donald Trump is more unhinged than whoever it may be, whether it's Putin or whether it's Kim Jong-un, it's all bullshit. What's up, Freedom Work? Thanks for tuning in. I've had an awful day. You've probably, I mean, let me know about your day. I've had a shitty day since this Bannon firing and the news of 2 more terror attacks. And I never got to address the topic of North Korea and this portrayal of Donald Trump as being more unhinged than North Korea. And this is where I'm going to do it. And it's not just that. So I'm getting to, let me come back. I'm getting to the point that I'm trying to make here. Character assassination is an important element of Marxist propaganda. You see, what you saw in those images, that's not anti-communist propaganda. They were portraying, remember this, they were portraying other communist regimes that they disagree with as evil. Okay, so it's communist regimes that don't toe the line of what they think the world should be, or they don't cooperate. I mean, and it's North Korea is the best example. Okay. They don't do films anymore about Vietnam, which is still the communist mindset, the communist system, even if it's economically not as purist as it used to be, is still in place in Vietnam. And Vietnam is a brutal country ruled by dictators and party hacks. It's not a free country. It has never been a free country, Vietnam, not under communism and not under the pro-American puppet regime. It doesn't matter. This is where we have to get real and talk about character assassination. And Steve Bannon is a person who's an excellent example of what character assassination involves. When you take a person who, and I'm just going to read a few headlines here. When you take a person who has done nothing to warrant this smear campaign. I'm not saying he's a good person. I'm not saying he's a nice guy that you could get along with, that you could play frisbee with on your lunch break. He might be a total dick, but this is a smear campaign. He is not a National Socialist. He's not a Nazi. He's not any type of that. He's not a white supremacist. There's no evidence of any of it. There's nothing. There is absolutely nothing to warrant this treatment that he's been getting. Okay? There's nothing. This man was basically hounded from the minute that he started working for Donald Trump, because he was what happened was that this person, Steve Bannon, was working for a publication called Breitbart that is opposed to the rest of the media. Okay? He's written books like Occupy Unmasked with David Horowitz. And David Horowitz runs his own media outlet, Front Page Magazine. So it's, I mean, they're friends, but those two, they know what the real threat is. The threat is leftist, communist propaganda that seeks to control the communications industry and have people receive a feed of disinformation about anybody that does not conform to the agenda of the powers that be. And you know, the fact that some communists will say, well, how can you call this a communist system? How, or you know, let me make it more accurate. How can you call this a communist system when you have the big banks, they're always foreclosing on people's houses and whatever? Well, when you have the government acting as sort of the cash register for the banks, that's not the capitalism that was envisioned by the system, you know, the system of mercantilists, of people like, or it's not mercantilists, you know, it's not the system as envisioned by Adam Smith and the other theorists, you know, all the way down to Milton Friedman and the modern day. The objective was to provide an environment where competition is fully possible and people can they can have all the economic freedom they need to pursue whatever endeavors that they want. And that's not the way it is with the banking system being as dependent on government management as it is. You have the Federal Reserve, you have all of this crap, and yet they say that Wall Street is an organ of capitalism. I don't think so. When you have the Export-Import Bank and all of these all of these institutions run by our government to favor certain corporations, then no, I am going to say that that's not, I'm going to do what the Marxists do and say that that's not real capitalism. That is crony capitalism, and crony, it's to be honest with you, it's to some degree socialist, because they're using that type of corrupt relationship to finance a massive welfare state. Somebody profits from that welfare state. I'm sorry to tell you guys. You know, they like to say we're a socialist country. We've always been a socialist country because we've had police and we've had an army and all that. That's not socialism. In Tsarist Russia, they had all of those things, and it was not socialism. Okay, if it was socialism, there would not have been a revolution in 1917. They had all of those things in Italy before Mussolini. They had everything that the roads did not come about as a result of socialism. Schools did not come about as a result of socialism. They came about through, you know, the state is never, let's say this, okay? If all of these programs were indeed socialist, then there would be no need for socialist parties and organizations, because then everything would have already been accomplished. There's not a single country in the world, with the exception of Somalia and you know, some of these random islands around the world, like in Indonesia, where only Aborigines live, where there is no such thing as a state government and administration. So I'm going to have to say that it's all bullshit. It doesn't. It's all a bunch of nonsense. The socialists claim that we need more government control. And I'm going to react also. You know, the Barcelona attack, coming on the backdrop of this this tragedy in Charlottesville, it was truly an exhibit of arrogance that Wolf Blitzer from CNN decided that it was Barcelona that was inspired by Charlottesville. Not that, I mean, if he was going to make the case, and I was just listening to this on the radio, somebody else was making a point, Jay Sekulow, who has a radio show. He's the lawyer for Donald Trump in the Russia investigation. So Sekulow said, why would they not say that the Barcelona attack and the Charlottesville attack were inspired by you know, drive-in terror attacks in London and other cities that have happened the whole summer? You know, the media believes that we have such a short memory, but I'm sorry to tell you, some of us have been paying attention and we're taking notes. So one more topic that I want to address that I think is very important is the idea of democratic socialism. Now, people want this to just become, you know, an accepted institution that people will know. Oh, yes, it's possible for socialists to be democratic. Well, I would say that it's not true. You have the Cambodia. Let me tell you something, okay? Democratic socialism is a myth. At the end of the process, the democracy goes out the window because once you render all control and all decisions to a higher governmental authority, a state authority that will just dictate to you terms, then no, the democracy disappears because they've taken that legitimacy, they've taken that mandate, and they're not going to give it back. And if anything, they're going to just fight amongst themselves for the power. They're not going to give anybody that's not in the club access to the club. They have already been given all of the access that they need, and they don't intend on sharing it. That's why you can see, and listen very carefully to this. That's why peaceful succession is so rare in communist regimes. I mean, there's no way, there's very rarely somebody who retires. You either die in office from old age, or you get overthrown and exiled, or you get murdered yourself. You have to remember that the first communist regime that in the modern era was Lenin's Russia. Lenin died of, I think it was cancer in 1927. He was succeeded by Stalin, who also died in I think it was 1954. Lenin was succeeded by Khrushchev, Nikita Khrushchev, he enacted a period of quote-unquote reform. And Khrushchev was basically kicked out of office in, I think it was 1963 or 64, in favor of Leonid Brezhnev. Okay, and you have to understand, Khrushchev did not make it into office, you know, by winning, you know, the sausage race like they do over at those Brewers games. He won he won because he was the only person that Stalin and his other assassins didn't murder as part of the purges. There were a lot of other people. If you talk about Yagoda and I think his name was Yezhov, Nikolai Yezhov, and Beria, Lavrenti Beria, all of those Soviet leaders, they basically thought, oh, well, yeah, we're going to stick it out under Stalin, and we're going, eventually when he croaks, we're going to take over. They thought maybe they would stab him in the back. Well, no, that's not what happened. Stalin made sure that there was nobody who thought that they were safe enough to be able to take his job. He made damn sure of it. He got that power deep into the creases of his hands, and he was not going to let it go. He was not going to let it go. And that's exactly what happened. You could go through the list. You can actually look at photos, or even paintings. Stalin paintings altered. I'm gonna bring up an image if I can find it. You know, this was a person who was made into a living god by his people. And they would, you know, as they would execute these people, they would vanish from the photos. Here, this is an excellent one. I'm going to share this screen. I mean, you can see at the beginning of this, you have, I think Borodin was one of the people here. I think that might be this guy over here on the right. And gradually they just airbrushed people out of it. Now, I think you can actually see, that these people on this bottom frame, they're just gone. And it's like they never existed. And that's the point of it. FreedomWorks says they only make fun of the commies that aren't doing it right as far as their utopian delusion. Well, what I think he's getting at, and I talked about the salami strategy. The salami strategy works. It never goes out of style in the Soviet style and communist style countries, and even socialist countries. When things go wrong, they blame somebody who's an easy fall guy, and they don't reform. It's not really reform if all you do is you keep the playbook, but you fire the players. Okay, that's not reform. Okay, that's substitution. If I keep the same playbook, whatever, let's say I have a football team, let's say I have a baseball team. If I have a baseball team and I don't, I keep getting errors in the field, and I don't shift and work on the, work on people's positions, their alignments, then that's not a reform, and that's like a really easy example. Yeah, you could talk about. I mean, there's so many analogies you can make. What they do is they will inevitably make up bullshit excuses about why their quote unquote system didn't work. For the most important element of it is blaming somebody. That's about it. And once they've blamed enough people and killed enough people and it still doesn't work, they start killing ordinary people. And that's socialism. It doesn't matter what, and the benign Western forms of it. They talk about democratic socialism and or social democracy in Europe. Those states, France and Germany and all that. Yes, they have some form of socialism, but they are teetering on the edge of insolvency. They will soon be basically on life support in terms of their economies. Germany, not as much yet, but it's going to happen. A lot of the elements that brought down, industries here in the United States are actually occurring right now in Germany. I know people that have told me that from Germany. And if I just might add, I have this book. I keep it near my desk all the time. It used to be my mouse pad. It's called, and Freedom Work, you'd probably like this one. It's called Debunking Utopia by Nima Sanandaji. It's an excellent work on why Nordic socialism is, and he says it, Nordic socialism is smoke and mirrors. At first glance, Nordic countries seem to have everything that liberals wish for America: equal income distribution, good health, low levels of poverty, and thriving economies, although they have big welfare states. By adopting social democracy, liberals believe America will turn into the Nordics, but it is all wishful thinking. And I'll let you look at it again. It's Debunking Utopia, and I actually heard about it on the Larry Elder show. And one of the things you should remember is that socialist parties are at the lowest popularity mark ever in some of these countries. Let's look at the Parliament of Sweden. No. The Riksdag. You have the Social Democrats and the Green Party. They're at 113 seats, but they actually have, their government has less seats than the opposition, which is hilarious. And then you have their left party. They are falling apart. They have a Social Democratic Party, but it's falling in popularity. People are tired of this bullshit. That's just Sweden. You could take a look at, let's look at the Parliament of Denmark. Whoops. They call it the Folketinget or whatever. You got they have the Liberal Party, which doesn't mean the same thing as it does here. They're in the government. You have the Liberal Alliance. You have the Conservative People's Party. 3 pro-business parties. They're in the they're basically in the government. And then you have all these others, various. The Social Democrats are in the opposition, and you have a bunch of other communist and socialist parties over over in the opposition, they have, one or two seats, 14 in one case, but they are at the weakest level in years because people know that they've reached the peak of their efficiency under socialism that they could possibly get, and now they are on the downward curve. It's the same idea as in Venezuela. It won't, in their case, it might not get as violent and dysfunctional, but it's not going to get any better under socialism. But what I'm going to leave you with is the fact that, you want to talk about salami strategy. Like I said, it is based on the work of a man named Rakosi. I'm going to bring up his name. Hold on. Rakosi. Matthias Rakosi. And I want you to take a good look. This is the person who came up with the whole strategy. Matthias Rakosi was a Hungarian communist politician. Born Matthias Rosenfeld. He renounced his religion, Judaism. Now I renounce him. I renounce all these people that have decided to forsake their heritage in order to achieve a utopia on earth. That's not, they don't, I will say that I disown them and I disown their descendants. And what he did was, it says, initially Rakosi and the communists appeared willing to work within the system. From 1947, hold on, when the Red Army set up a Soviet-approved government in Hungary from 1944 to 45, Rakosi was appointed General Secretary of the Hungarian Communist Party. He was a member of the High National Council from September 27th to December 7th, 1945. Rakosi was Deputy Prime Minister from 1945 to 1949 and was acting Prime Minister from, so he had several high-ranking positions in the non-communist governments. And it says initially Rakosi and the communists appeared willing to work within the system. From 1947 onward, however, he and the communists began pressuring the other parties to push out those not willing to work with the communists on the grounds that they were fascists or fascist sympathizers. Later on, after the communists won complete control, Rakosi referred to this practice as salami tactics, saying he destroyed the non-communist forces in the country by cutting them off like slices of salami. The process began when smallholder party Prime Minister Ferenc Nagy was forced to resign in favor of a more pliant smallholder Lajos Dinyas. I don't know how to, I mean, these are weird names. It's Hungarian. It's not related to any language in Europe. By the 1947 elections, the communists had won a majority and had largely emasculated the next largest non-communist party, the Social Democrats. By October 1947, Rakosi had dropped all pretense of democracy. He gave the non-communist parties an ultimatum: cooperate with the new communist-dominated coalition government or go into exile. By the end of 1947, the opposition parties had largely shunned aside their more courageous members, leaving them in the hands of fellow travelers willing to do the communists' bidding. In the summer of 1948, the communists forced the Social Democrats to merge with them to form the Hungarian Working People's Party. The remaining independent-minded Social Democrats were quickly pushed out, leaving the MDP as an enlarged MKP. So basically, they did a hostile takeover, as they call it in corporate world. Hostile takeover of another party. He also pushed out the smallholder president, Zoltan Tildy, in favor of Social Democrat turned communist Arpad Zsákazsics, and forced Dinyas to resign in favor of the openly pro-communist István Doby. A year later, elections took place with a single list of candidates. Although non-communists nominally still figured, they were actually fellow travelers. This marked the onset of undisguised communist rule in Hungary. Rakosi described himself as Stalin's best Hungarian disciple and Stalin's best pupil. At the height of his rule, he developed a strong cult of personality around himself. Approximately 350,000 officials and intellectuals were purged under his rule from 1948 to 1956. Rákosi imposed totalitarian rule on Hungary, arresting, jailing, and killing both real and imagined foes in various waves of Stalin-inspired political purges. In August 1952, he also became prime minister or chairman of the Council of Ministers. However, on June 13, 1953, to appease the Soviet Politburo, he accepted the Soviet model of collective leadership. While he gave up the premiership to Imre Nagy, he retained the office of general secretary. And Nagy favored a more humane way of governing, which Rákosi vigorously opposed. On March 9, 1955, the Central Committee of the NDP condemned Nagy for rightist deviation. So this was a communist who claimed, oh, we can't go this hard. People are going to revolt against us. Well, they said, well, we're going to fuck you too. We're going to get you out of power because you're preventing us from concentrating more power in our hands. Hungarian newspapers joined the attacks, and Nagy was blamed for the country's economic problems. On April 18th, the National Assembly unanimously sacked Nagy from his post. Although the Kremlin frowned on a return of Rákosi to the premiership, he and Nagy's successor, András Hegedus, quickly put the country back on its previous Stalinist course. So at a certain point, he was forced to retire after Stalin died, and he lived the rest of his life in Kyrgyzstan. So they took him as far away as possible from Hungary so he couldn't do any more damage. Shortly before his death in 1970, Rákosi was finally granted permission to return to Hungary if he promised not to engage in any political activities. He refused the deal and remained in the USSR, where he died in Gorky in 1971. After his death, his ashes were privately returned to Hungary for burial. Only his initials are visible on the gravestone to avoid vandalism. I mean, I guess eventually people will figure it out. So you have a person here who's totally lacking in any, he just wants the power. That's what they're all about. That's what communism is about. It's all about concentrating power in the hands of a fake proletarian republic. And that's what he did. And I'll tell you one other story before I leave. You have Cambodia. They had one of the worst genocides in the history of the world. And I think it was a third of their population was murdered by communists. The Party of Democratic Kampuchea. So under the communists, it was called Kampuchea. Was a political party in Cambodia formed as a continuation of the Communist Party of Kampuchea. In December 1981, in the mid-1980s, it publicly claimed that its ideology was democratic socialism, having ostensibly renounced communism. So these were people, they had been kicked out of power by the Vietnamese partly because they had so screwed up Cambodia and killed so many people and turned the country into a hellhole. And therefore they were useless to the Vietnamese. The Vietnamese wanted them as useful puppets, not just to murder people and butcher their country. So yeah, they decided in the mid-80s, okay, we're not going to be quote unquote communists. We're going to be democratic socialists. We've killed as many people as we can, but now we're going to offer them a choice. There's no such thing as democratic socialism. You can start out as democratic, but once they receive the least bit of credible resistance from anybody, they show who they really are. They are not they're not a movement that believes in the importance of dialogue and compromise. And those of you that like this Bernie Sanders form of socialism, this nice old man who's your grandpa and whatever. Remember, this man. First of all, he is an old man. So once he dies, and he's not going to be around forever. who do you think is going to take over? It's going to be one of these ogres that would come in his place, and they're not going to use the Bernie tactics, because it's going to be a new generation. It's the same as they had in Exodus, that a new pharaoh came to power or started his reign that did not know Joseph or any of his works. What will happen is this, okay? You're going to have all of these cucks that have supported socialism until now. They are either going to have to process the fact that socialism is bringing about the ruin of our society, or they will continue down this line, and they will see, as Benov said himself, they will see that once communists actually come into power, there is no power sharing. All this talk of plurality and a more compassionate society that cares for the needy will go out the window. They will be shown that they have supported a regime that it only desires the concentration of power. It's not something that's unique to communism, but it is a symptom of it. It happened in every single communist country until now, whether it was Hungary or Cambodia or China or Cuba. How many democratic decisions were taken by the Fidel Castro regime in Cuba? There's no coincidence that the man who was decided would be his successor was his own younger brother, who was his executioner. Okay? This is not, they're not joking around. And we can't start letting them define the narrative out there. The people that are being portrayed as Nazis and fascist sympathizers out there, okay, maybe some of them are, but if you look at the landscape of people who are being called that, what are they doing? All they're doing is they're trying to challenge the common knowledge that is being put out there by a lying and unethical media. You had these terror attacks in Barcelona. It was not even mentioned that the terror attacks occurred against a Jewish target, a Jewish institution. I only found out about that today. They're hiding that. They don't want people to know that. And next week, we're not even going to hear about Barcelona. It's going to be in the rearview mirror. How many of these attacks are already in the rearview mirror? I mean, you tell me. Do you remember them? Do you remember Manchester? Have you forgotten about Manchester already? Or the London Bridge attack? Or the Arc de Triomphe attack? Or I think it was the Champs-Élysées attack over in Paris. Do you remember any of these attacks that I'm talking about? Have you already forgotten? Do you remember the Christmas truck attack from last year in Germany? I don't think you do, because they've conditioned you to just accept it, that this is the new normal, and that to think that anything else is possible, that we can live in a world where this isn't a day-to-day occurrence, is something that is intolerant and just regressive and reactionary. And that's not the way it is. People have the right to desire safety and stability and freedom and the ability to talk. That's why the last 2 days, I mean, I had a great feeling last night and it disappeared by the morning. The last 2 days, I had an interview with a teacher, Esperanza, and if you noticed, she was terrified of having anybody know her identity and what she thought. Do you understand what that means? This means that a person who is teaching our children does not have the capacity. She does not feel that she has the freedom to express herself honestly in this world. That she has this understanding that in order to get by during the day, she must live this lie and pretend that everything is fine. And it's the same thing that a lot of people are. I think it's more extreme of a case with her because this is a teacher. She's actually teaching other people a lot of important skills, and yet she can't be honest with them about her real thoughts. Don't you think that's a little messed up? And then I had another person who, he had an amazing philosophy where we have to let go of all of this noise and all of this distortion that causes the hate and division between people of different races and religions. And it was a very uplifting experience. And I have to say, after that hour and I think it was almost 40 minutes of talking to this guy, I thought, you know, this is the type of attitude that would help make this country healthier. I don't know if everybody can take the same approach, but it looks like it's working for him. And I talked to him off air. It was not an act. But, you know, sadly, today, what has happened, you had a person, Steve Bannon, you know, I don't think this ranks as the worst tragedy of the week, but he was character assassinated throughout his career working for Donald Trump. And people, you know, they're Trump fans and they're like, oh, it doesn't matter, MAGA, whatever. No, Steve Bannon, for all the flaws in his character, for all the problems that he has presenting himself as a person with acceptable views, he has views that are not anti-Semitic or racist. He has views that are simply they're not multicultural. They're very staunchly for values that are conservative or in favor of a America First approach, but that's not racism or anti-Semitism or Islamophobia. Okay, he has plenty of criticisms of other ways of life because this is a person with a free-thinking personality. It doesn't matter to attack his character and say that he's an awful human being is one thing. I mean, people have already said, people that know him, Shapiro, who's worked with him, they've said, yeah, he's a complete asshole. That's not that doesn't make it right to tell lies and slanders about him. And you know, that's exactly what's been happening. People have been saying that he was the real president, that he's Trump's brain, all of that. They forget that every other president has had a person like that has been called their brain. Do you not remember Valerie Jarrett and Karl Rove and Dick Morris, who was Clinton's, and who turned against him? So did Clinton's brain turn against Clinton? That's my question. No, you have to give Bill Clinton credit for what he did. It was not all Dick Morris's work. Dick Morris had a hand in it, but you cannot just say that the people behind the people in power are the real people pulling the strings in every case. And I don't think it was the case with Steve Bannon. And I don't know if it was the case with, I mean, I have to be honest, I think that President Obama, with all of his flaws, I don't think that Valerie Jarrett was his brain either. So this was an awful week that has been capped by the end of a career, at least in government, for a guy who, you know, he didn't deserve to leave this way. I don't care about all the other machinations, why it happened, if it was planned, if it was, you know, if it's part of some sort of game. I don't really care, because personally, I think that it's important to note that this person will be remembered as a footnote, Steve Bannon, at the end of 8 years or 4 years or however long Trump is in office. Now that Bannon has been fired or quit within a year, how can they now say that he is Trump's brain? I don't think that they can make the case anymore. I think that their whole concocted nonsense has gone out the window just based on this week and the Russia investigation's colossal failure. Have a good weekend, and I might speak to you tomorrow, depending on my schedule.